The meeting room on Harmony's Edge Station buzzed with quiet conversation. Representatives from 12 different species sat around a large oval table. The air recycling system worked hard to mix the different atmospheres each species needed to breathe. Kim Tae-ho sat straight in his chair, watching the alien delegates with careful eyes. His black hair was cut short in military style, though he wore a simple diplomatic suit now. Next to him, Park So-min shuffled through data tablets, preparing their presentation. She looked nervous, but determined. Across the table, Commander Veltar, of the Altarian Peacekeeping Force, leaned back in his chair. His tall, thin body was covered in natural crystal plates that caught the station's lights. Forearms moved in graceful gestures as he spoke to his aide. His voice carried clearly across the room. "I still cannot understand why we must waste time with these creatures," Veltar said to Sub-Commander Quindel. "They come from a death world. Violence is all they know." Quindel nodded, his own crystal plates shifting color slightly. "The reports say their planet has extreme weather, dangerous animals, and constant natural disasters. How can beings from such a place understand civilized discussion?" Tae-ho kept his face calm, but his hands tightened slightly on the table. He had heard these comments many times since arriving at the station. The other humans had learned to ignore the insults. But something about Veltar's tone made his jaw clench. The meeting began with formal introductions. Each species stated their interest in the new trade agreement. When it came time for Earth's presentation, Park So-min stood and activated the holographic display. "Honored delegates," she began, "Earth offers unique technologies and resources to benefit all member species of this consortium." The display showed images of human cities, factories, and research facilities. "Our medical advances have eliminated many diseases. Our engineering creates structures that last for centuries. Our agricultural methods can feed billions." A delegate from the Centauri system leaned forward with interest. "These medical techniques are impressive. How did your species develop such advanced healing methods?" Park So-min smiled. "Many came from treating battlefield injuries. Human history includes many conflicts, but we learned from each one. Pain teaches lessons that peace cannot." Veltar laughed, a sound like crystal chimes breaking. "Of course, the Deathworlders learn through violence and suffering. How primitive." He turned to address the other delegates. "Friends, we must ask ourselves, do we want partners who solve problems by fighting, or do we want civilized beings who use reason and discussion?" The room fell quiet. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Tae-ho felt heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Park So-min continued her presentation, showing Earth's contributions to space exploration and energy production. But Veltar interrupted again. "Energy production through nuclear fusion? How dangerous." He gestured with all four arms. "Only a violent species would harness such destructive forces. We Altarians long ago learned to use safe, clean crystal resonance for our power needs." "Your crystal power works well on your low-gravity world with its stable weather," Tae-ho said quietly. "But what happens when your crystals break? What backup systems do you have?" Veltar's crystal plates darkened. "Our crystals do not break, Deathworlder. We are not clumsy barbarians who destroy everything we touch." The insult hung in the air. Other delegates looked between the humans and Altarians with growing concern. Tae-ho felt his military training kick in, reading the room for threats and exits. Park So-min placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Perhaps we could discuss the technical details later," she suggested diplomatically. But Veltar was not finished. He stood, his tall frame towering over the seated humans. "I think our time would be better spent with real civilizations. These humans bring nothing but the stench of violence and death. Look at their representative." He pointed at Tae-ho. "Even now, he sits like a coiled serpent, ready to strike. This is what their world produces. Killers who cannot think, only react." Tae-ho's calm finally cracked. He stood slowly, his movement controlled but full of purpose. "Commander Veltar, you speak of things you do not understand." "Oh, but I do understand, Deathworlder. Veltar's voice carried mockery. I have read the reports about your species. You kill your own kind over resources, territory, even ideas. You turn every tool into a weapon. You celebrate those who die in combat as heroes. His tone became cruel. Tell me how many of your fellow soldiers died because of your primitive need for violence. How many friends did you watch bleed out in the mud of your savage world? The room went completely silent. Park So-min gasped softly. Other delegates stared in shock at Veltar's words. Taeho's face showed no emotion, but his voice carried the coldness of deep space. Commander, you have just insulted the memory of better beings than you will ever be. Warriors who died protecting others. Heroes who gave their lives so civilians could live safely. He stepped around the table, moving closer to the Altarian. They died with honor. Something your comfortable, sheltered existence has never taught you. Veltar laughed again. Honor? Is that what you call meaningless death? Your friends died, because your species cannot evolve beyond violence. They were beasts and they died as beasts die. Meaninglessly, achieving nothing. The words hit Taeho like physical blows. Images flashed through his mind. Sergeant Kim dying to save a school, bus full of children. Lieutenant Park throwing himself on a grenade to protect his squad. Captain Lee holding off an entire enemy unit while wounded civilians escaped. All of them dismissed as meaningless by this crystal-plated fool who had never faced real danger. I challenge you to single combat, Taeho said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. By the ancient laws of your own people, I call for trial by blade. Veltar's crystal plates paled. Around the table, delegates sat frozen in shock. In Altarian culture, a formal challenge could not be refused without losing all honor and status. But single combat had not been practiced in their society for hundreds of years. Quindel whispered urgently to his commander. Sir, perhaps we could find another way to resolve this misunderstanding. But other Altarians were now watching. Word was already spreading through the station's communication networks. Veltar's reputation among his own people depended on his response. The commander straightened his tall frame, crystal plates shifting to a confident blue color. Very well, Deathworlder. I accept your primitive challenge. When you lie defeated, perhaps your species will learn that civilization always triumphs over barbarism. Park So-min grabbed Taeho's arm. This is madness. You do not have to do this. Taeho looked down at her, his expression softening slightly. Yes, I do. Some insults cannot be ignored. He turned back to Veltar. When do we fight? Tomorrow, at the station's main arena. Traditional Altarian rules, crystal blades, no armor, combat until first blood or surrender. Veltar smiled confidently. I will enjoy teaching you the difference between your crude violence and true martial skill. As the formal challenge was recorded by the station's computers, delegates began filing out of the room, whispering excitedly among themselves. Word would spread quickly through the diplomatic community. The arrogant Deathworlder was going to learn a lesson about civilized combat. Veltar left with his aide, already discussing preparation rituals. Other aliens followed, eager to place bets on what they saw as a foregone conclusion. Only the humans remained in the empty meeting room. Park So-min looked at Taeho with concern and frustration. Do you know what you have done? If you lose, Earth's chances of joining the trade consortium are finished. Taeho nodded slowly. If I had let those words stand unanswered, we would have lost anyway. Some things are worth fighting for, So-min. The memory of good people who died protecting others is one of them. Outside the meeting room, the station buzzed with news of the challenge. Beings who had never seen real combat, prepared to witness what they thought would be a simple demonstration of superior alien evolution over primitive human aggression. News of the challenge spread through Harmony's edge station like fire through dry grass. Within hours, beings from dozens of species had heard about the duel between the Altarian Peacekeeper and the human diplomat. Most found it amusing. Some found it educational. A few found it concerning. Lee Jin-woo arrived at the human quarters first, his military bearing obvious even in civilian clothes. He had served with Taeho in the Korean Special Forces before joining the diplomatic security detail. His face showed worry as he found his old friend sitting quietly in the small recreation room. "You have lost your mind," Jinwoo said without ceremony, dropping into a chair across from Taeho. "Fighting an Altarian? They have 4 arms, natural armor plating, and they are twice your height." Taeho looked up from the tactical report he was reading. "They also evolved on a world with half Earth's gravity and no large predators. When did you last see an Altarian move quickly?" "This is not a training exercise, Taeho. This is real combat with real weapons." Jinwoo leaned forward. "What happens if you lose? What happens to our mission here?" Before Taeho could answer, Park So-min entered with Dr. Choi Hye-jin, the expedition's xenobiologist. Dr. Choi carried several data tablets and looked excited despite the serious situation. "I have been studying Altarian physiology," Dr. Choi announced, setting her tablets on the table. "Their muscle density is much lower than ours due to their world's low gravity. Their reaction times are also slower because they never needed to develop quick reflexes. That does not help if Veltar cuts him in half with a crystal blade," Jinwoo pointed out. Park So-min sat down heavily. "The entire diplomatic community is treating this as entertainment. I heard 3 different species taking bets on how long you will last before surrendering." "What are the odds?" Taeho asked with mild curiosity. "Most bets are on you lasting less than 2 minutes, Dr. Choi said. The longest anyone thinks you can survive is 5 minutes. They are giving Veltar odds of 20-1. Through the eye room's viewport, they could see construction crews working on the main arena. The duel would take place in the station's largest amphitheater, capable of holding thousands of spectators. Word had already reached nearby systems. Ships were changing course to witness what many called the Deathworlder's folly. Captain Ryu Minho, commander of the human security detail, joined them with the latest intelligence reports. His weathered face showed professional concern. "I have been talking to station security," Captain Ryu reported. "They are expecting over 3,000 spectators. Delegates from 47 different species have confirmed attendance. Several news networks are sending recording crews." "This is becoming a circus," Park So-min muttered. "It was always going to be a circus," Taeho replied calmly. "The question is whether we perform well or poorly." Captain Ryu placed a secure tablet on the table. "I managed to get recordings of Veltar's combat training sessions. He practices traditional Altarian martial arts as a hobby. Want to see what you are facing?" The tablet screen showed Veltar in a private training room. He moved through complex combat forms with all 4 arms, each holding practice weapons. His movements were beautiful to watch, flowing like water, each strike perfectly placed and controlled. The Altarian martial arts emphasized grace, precision, and overwhelming technique. "He is very skilled," Dr. Choi observed. "Look how he coordinates all 4 limbs independently. No human could match that level of complexity." Jinwoo frowned as he watched the recording. "But look how slowly he moves. Those techniques are designed for ceremony, not real fighting." Taeho studied the screen carefully, his trained eye analyzing each movement. "He telegraphs every attack. Look, you can see each strike coming 3 moves in advance." "You cannot be serious," Park So-min said. "He has 4 weapons to your 1. 4 weapons means 4 targets to track," Taeho replied. "In real combat, more weapons can be a disadvantage if you cannot use them all effectively." Ambassador Yang Gyonseo burst into the room, her diplomatic robes flowing behind her. Her face showed the strain of a long day dealing with alien politics. "I have been trying to find a way to cancel this ridiculous duel," she announced. "The Altarian government refuses to intervene. They say their honor codes are sacred and cannot be broken." "What about our government?" Jinwoo asked. "Earth's leadership has given Taeho full authority to proceed as he sees fit," Ambassador Yang replied with frustration. "They apparently trust his judgment more than I do." Captain Ryu activated another screen showing the arena preparations. They are installing special viewing platforms for species that need different atmospheric conditions. This is becoming the biggest sporting event the station has ever hosted. Dr. Choi pulled up physiological comparisons between humans and Altarians. The good news is that Altarian crystal plating is mostly decorative. It provides some protection, but has weak points at the joints. The bad news is that their reach advantage is enormous. Reach does not matter if your opponent cannot hit you, Teho observed. Ambassador Yang sat down with a tired sigh. Do you understand what happens if you lose? The other species will see humans as exactly what Veltar claims we are, violent primitives who cannot compete with civilized beings. Our trade negotiations will be finished. And if I win? Teho asked. If you win, we might gain something more valuable than trade agreements. Park So-min said slowly. We might gain respect. Through the viewport, more ships could be seen arriving at the station. The diplomatic quarter buzzed with activity as alien delegates prepared for tomorrow's entertainment. Most expected to see a quick demonstration of Altarian superiority over human aggression. Jinwoo leaned back in his chair. I wish I could fight alongside you like the old days. This is not that kind of fight, Teho replied. This is about proving that our fallen friends did not die meaninglessly, that their sacrifice had honor and meaning. Dr. Choi looked up from her research. I found something interesting about Altarian combat psychology. They have not fought a real war in over 800 years. Their entire understanding of violence comes from historical study and practice forms. What does that mean? Ambassador? Yang asked. It means they have never faced an opponent who actually wanted to kill them, Captain Ryu said grimly. They treat combat like an art form instead of survival. The group fell silent as the implications sank in. Outside the station's news broadcasts were already calling tomorrow's duel the most anticipated sporting event in recent galactic history. Commentators discussed Altarian martial arts and speculated about human combat abilities. Most experts agreed. The human would provide brief entertainment before being thoroughly defeated by superior alien technique and evolution. It would be an educational experience about the difference between primitive aggression and civilized skill. Ambassador Yang stood to leave. I will make one final attempt to find a diplomatic solution, though I doubt it will succeed. After she left, the remaining humans sat in contemplative silence. Through the station's communication system, they could hear excited chatter in dozens of alien languages. The word Deathworlder appeared frequently in the conversations. Are you ready for this? Jinwoo asked his old friend. Teho closed the tactical reports and stood. I have been ready since Veltar opened his mouth about our fallen comrades. Tomorrow he learns what honor really means. Outside their quarters, the station prepared for what many considered would be the most one-sided fight in diplomatic history. Crystal Blade versus human determination. Civilized technique versus Deathworld pragmatism. The galaxy was about to learn something new about Earth's children. The main amphitheater of Harmony's Edge Station had been transformed overnight. What normally served as a concert hall now looked like an ancient arena. The central space was cleared and marked with traditional Altarian combat circles. Thousands of seats surrounded the fighting area, each equipped with atmosphere controls for different species. Beings from across the galaxy filled the viewing areas hours before the scheduled duel. The excitement was obvious in every language and communication method. Tentacled creatures gestured wildly with their appendages. Crystalline beings changed colors rapidly in animated discussion. Even the usually reserved silicon-based life forms showed interest by adjusting their geometric patterns. In the Altarian preparation chamber, Commander Veltar went through his ritual cleansing. Kethiron, the ancient weapons master who had taught him the traditional forms, supervised each step of the ceremony. Remember, student, Kethiron intoned in his creaky voice, combat is not about violence. It is about the perfect expression of technique and control. Show this primitive creature the difference between his crude aggression and our refined art. Veltar's crystal plates gleamed after the ritual polishing. 4 ceremonial robes covered his tall frame, each representing a different aspect of Altarian martial philosophy. His movements as he practiced were fluid and hypnotic. The human thinks brute force can overcome centuries of development and training, Veltar said, moving through a complex series of strikes with imaginary weapons. Today, he learns that evolution has left his kind behind. Kethiron nodded approvingly. You have mastered the 17 classical forms and the 23 traditional combinations. No being in the galaxy has achieved such perfection in our martial arts. Outside the preparation chamber, Sub-Commander Quindel briefed the Altarian press contingent. Reporters from dozens of worlds wanted to know about their commander's combat abilities and training. Commander Veltar has studied our warrior traditions for over 40 years, Quindel explained. He holds the rank of master in 6 different fighting styles. The human has no hope of matching such dedication and skill. The questions from reporters reveal the general attitude throughout the galaxy. How long do you expect the fight to last? Will the human surrender before serious injury occurs? What lesson does this teach other primitive species about challenging civilized authority? None of the questions considered the possibility that Veltar might lose. In the human quarters, the atmosphere was much different. Taiho sat quietly, eyes closed, running through mental exercises he had learned during Special Forces training. His breathing was slow and controlled. His body remained perfectly still. Captain Ryu watched from across the room. He had seen this before. Taiho was not meditating or performing ceremonies. He was preparing to kill. Dr. Choi entered quietly, carrying a medical scanner. I need to take baseline readings in case of injury, she whispered. As she ran the scanner over Taiho, her eyes widened at the results. His heart rate was actually slower than normal. His muscle tension was minimal. Most surprisingly, his brain activity showed the focused patterns of a predator preparing to hunt. How do you feel? She asked softly. Taiho opened his eyes. Ready. Jin Woo checked his watch. 1 hour until the ceremony begins. The arena is completely full. They had to turn away thousands of beings who wanted to watch. Park Somin looked worried. The betting has gotten completely out of control. Some species are wagering entire trade contracts on the outcome. If you lose, it affects more than just our mission. I will not lose, Taiho said with quiet certainty. Ambassador, Yang made one final appearance, her face showing resignation. The Galactic Sports Commission has declared this an official sanctioned event. They will record it for historical archives. Representatives from Earth's government will be watching. She paused, looking at Taiho with something like admiration mixed with fear. No pressure, but the reputation of our entire species now rests on your shoulders. Taiho smiled slightly. It always has. We just have a chance to show the galaxy who we really are. In the arena, the opening ceremonies began. Traditional Altarian musicians played crystal harmonies that resonated through the station's structure. Dancers performed the historical combat rituals that had evolved into entertainment over the centuries. Commentator Zilfan, whose species had covered sporting events for over 1,000 years, addressed the galactic audience. Friends and beings, today we witness something unique in modern times. A challenge between a master of classical Altarian combat arts and a representative of the species humans call themselves. This promises to be educational for all who believe in the superiority of civilized development over primitive aggression. His co-commentator, a floating energy being named Fluxara, added analysis. Our scientific consultants have studied human physiology. While they possess slightly higher muscle density due to their high-gravity world, they lack the reach, flexibility, and natural armor of an Altarian warrior. The human's only advantage might be unpredictability, but that hardly matters against superior technique. The crowd stirred as arbitrator Nelseth entered the arena. The ancient Centaurian's reputation for fairness was legendary. His presence meant the duel would be conducted according to the strictest traditional standards. By the ancient laws, Nelseth announced in a voice that carried clearly through the amphitheater. This combat shall be conducted with honor. Crystal blades of equal weight and balance. No armor beyond natural protection. Combat continues until first blood is drawn or surrender is declared. The weapons were presented with great ceremony, 2 crystal blades, each carved from a single piece of pure resonance crystal from Altair Prime. They hummed with harmonic energy when moved, creating beautiful tones that had inspired musicians for generations. Security Chief Knox Allen watched the proceedings with growing concern. His species had been warriors before joining galactic civilization. Something about the human's calm confidence reminded him of old stories his grandfather had told about real fighters from the early days. He activated his private communication link to Station Command. Increase security around the arena. Also, prepare medical teams for trauma injuries, not just the light wounds we expected. Is there a problem? His aide asked. Knox Allen studied the human through his security monitors. Tejo sat perfectly still, showing no signs of pre-combat nervousness. I am not sure, but something feels wrong about the assumptions everyone is making. Han Dong-hyun, monitoring the station's communication systems, noted the massive interest. From across the galaxy, over 2 billion beings were connected to watch the live broadcast. Messages poured in from every civilized world, most expressing amusement at human foolishness. One message stood out among the thousands. It came from an ancient warrior species that had not been heard from in centuries. The young ones have forgotten what real combat looks like. Today they remember. As the ceremonial preparations reached their conclusion, both fighters prepared for their entrance. Veltar completed his ritual meditation, confident in his superior training and natural advantages. His supporters in the crowd began chanting traditional battle songs. Tejo stood and stretched, loosening muscles that had remained perfectly controlled during hours of mental preparation. He looked at his friends and colleagues one final time. Whatever happens, he said quietly, remember that some things are worth fighting for. The memory of good people is one of them. The arena fell silent as the announcements began. In minutes, the galaxy would witness something none of them expected. The Deathworlder was about to show them what evolution on a dangerous world really produced. The arena fell silent as the formal introductions began. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy turned their attention to the central combat circle. The air hummed with excitement and anticipation. Most spectators expected to witness a brief, educational demonstration of civilized superiority over primitive aggression. Arbitrator Nalseth raised his ancient arms, and his voice carried clearly through the amphitheater's acoustic system. By the laws older than our civilizations, by the codes that govern honorable combat, let the challenged enter first. Commander Veltar emerged from the preparation tunnel to thunderous applause. His tall, elegant frame moved with practiced grace. Forearms swayed in perfect coordination as he acknowledged the crowd. His crystal plates caught the arena lights, creating rainbow patterns that danced across his body. He wore the traditional white robes of an Altarian duelist, each fold arranged according to ancient custom. The applause continued for several minutes. Beings from dozens of species cheered for what they saw as the representative of civilized evolution. Veltar performed the ritual greeting to each section of the audience, his movements flowing like water. Commentator Zilfan provided analysis for the galactic broadcast. Notice the perfect control in every gesture. Veltar has dedicated his life to mastering the classical forms. Each movement demonstrates the superiority of disciplined training over crude instinct. Fluxara added technical details. Our sensors show his crystal plating has achieved perfect resonance frequency. His four-armed combat stance allows him to attack and defend simultaneously from multiple angles. The human faces not just superior technique, but superior evolution itself. In the betting sections, the odds continued to favor Veltar by enormous margins. Some species wagered entire planetary resources on what they considered a certain outcome. The few bets placed on the human were treated as jokes or gestures of sympathy. Veltar took his position in the combat circle and began his traditional warm-up display. All forearms moved in complex patterns, showing the full range of classical, Altarian martial arts. He flowed through the 7 sacred forms, each transition more beautiful than the last. The crowd gasped in appreciation as Veltar demonstrated the flowering crystal technique, where all 4 limbs created intricate geometric patterns in the air. His mastery was obvious to every observer. This was art elevated to the level of combat, or perhaps combat elevated to the level of art. Beautiful, whispered a Centaurian diplomat to her companion. The human should surrender now and spare himself the embarrassment. Perhaps watching this display will teach his species some humility, replied a crystalline being whose facets sparkled with amusement. Veltar completed his demonstration with the legendary Phoenix Rising form, a technique so complex that most Altarians could not perform it even after decades of practice. The crowd erupted in appreciation. Several beings actually wept at the beauty of perfect technique. "And now," announced Nalseth, "let the challenger enter." The applause died to polite scattered clapping as Teho walked into the arena. The contrast was striking. Where Veltar was tall and graceful, the human appeared compact and solid. Where Veltar flowed like water, Teho moved with the direct purpose of a machine built for function over form. Teho wore simple combat clothing without decoration or ceremony. His appearance drew murmurs from the crowd, most expressing pity or amusement. Next to the elegant Altarian, he looked primitive and crude. "Look at the size difference," observed a delegate from the Spiral Arm Coalition. "The human barely reaches the Altarian's chest. How can such a small creature hope to compete?" Dr. Choi, watching from the human section, bit her tongue to keep from commenting on what the observers were missing. Taiho's movements showed none of Veltar's flowing grace, but they demonstrated something else entirely: absolute efficiency. Every step served a purpose. Every gesture was calculated and controlled. Jin Wu recognized the signs from their military service together. Taiho was not performing for the crowd. He was studying his opponent, measuring distances, calculating angles and timing. The human had already begun fighting, though the aliens could not recognize warfare when it was not dressed up in ceremony. Teho removed his diplomatic jacket, revealing the compact, scarred torso of a career soldier. His arms showed the practical, muscle development that came from survival training rather than ceremonial forms. Several older beings in the crowd shifted uncomfortably as they noticed details the younger species missed. "Those are not ceremonial marks," Security Chief Knox Allen muttered to his aide. "Those are combat scars. Real ones." The weapons ceremony began with great formality. The crystal blades were presented on traditional cushions, each weapon having been crafted by master artisans over months of careful work. They hummed with harmonic resonance, creating haunting melodies that had inspired Altarian poets for generations. Veltar accepted his blade with ritual reverence, holding it in his primary right hand while his other three arms assumed classical defensive positions. He performed the traditional testing sequence, creating complex sound patterns as the crystal edge moved through the air. The crowd murmured in appreciation at his technique. Teho accepted his weapon with a simple nod. He tested its balance, with a few basic movements treating it like what it was, a tool designed to cut. His testing was practical rather than artistic, focused on weight distribution and grip rather than ceremonial beauty. The contrast drew more comments from the spectators. Does the human not understand the ritual significance of the blade acceptance? Perhaps. His species lacks the cultural development to appreciate such traditions. This will be educational for all primitive species watching. Commentator Zilfon provided historical context. The crystal blade ceremony has remained unchanged for over 2,000 years. It represents the transformation of base matter into artistic perfection, much like the evolution of violent impulses into civilized behavior. As the formal preparations concluded, both fighters moved to their starting positions. The combat circle was marked with traditional Altarian symbols, representing honor, skill, technique, and victory. Veltar positioned himself according to classical doctrine, all four arms ready to demonstrate the superiority of advanced martial development. Teho simply stood and waited. The betting reached fever pitch in the final moments before combat began. The odds had moved even further in Veltar's favor as spectators watched the pre-fight displays. Most aliens could not imagine how the crude human could possibly compete with such obvious superiority. Nalseth raised his arbitrator's staff. Combat begins when the staff falls. It ends with first blood or surrender. May honor guide both warriors. The ancient Centaurian held the staff high, and the arena fell completely silent. Thousands of beings held their breath in anticipation. Galactic news networks prepared to broadcast what they expected would be a quick lesson in evolutionary superiority. Veltar assumed his opening stance, a classical formation called the Four Gates of Wisdom. His body became a perfect example of Altarian martial arts, with each limb positioned according to principles developed over millennia. His crystal plates shifted to battle configuration, providing maximum protection while maintaining flexibility. Taeho raised his blade and settled into a simple guard position. No ceremony, no complex formations, no artistic expression, just a predator preparing to do what evolution had designed him for. The staff began to fall toward the arena floor. In seconds, the galaxy would discover what happened when classical perfection met practical lethality. The Deathworlder was about to show them that survival was the only martial art that mattered. The arbitrator's staff hit the arena floor with a crystalline chime that echoed through the silent amphitheater. For a heartbeat, neither fighter moved. Then, Veltar began his opening sequence. The Altarian commander flowed into the classical first movement of the Dawn Blade technique. His forearms moved in perfect harmony, each following the ancient patterns that had been refined over centuries. Primary blade thrust forward in a controlled arc, while secondary weapons provided covering strikes. His movements were beautiful to watch, like a deadly dance performed by a master artist. The crowd held its breath in appreciation. Even beings unfamiliar with Altarian martial arts could see the incredible skill on display. Every angle was perfect. Every transition flowed seamlessly into the next. This was what happened when a species had centuries to develop combat into high art. Commentator Zilfon whispered into his broadcast microphone, "Magnificent technique. Notice how each strike serves multiple purposes: attack, defense, and positioning for the next sequence. The human face is not just a weapon, but a living expression of martial perfection." Taeho stood motionless, crystal blade held in a simple guard position. His dark eyes tracked every movement of Veltar's approach. To most observers, the human looked frozen with fear or overwhelmed by his opponent's obvious superiority. Dr. Choi knew better. From her position in the human observation section, she could see details the other spectators missed. Taeho's breathing remained steady. His stance stayed balanced. His grip on the weapon never tightened with tension. He was not frozen with fear. He was waiting. Veltar continued his sequence, each movement flowing into the next according to classical doctrine. His blade work created harmonious tones as the crystal edges moved through the air. The sound patterns were as beautiful as the visual display, turning combat into a multisensory art form. "First blood will be drawn within moments," predicted Fluxara. "The human cannot possibly counter such perfect technique. This is why civilized species have moved beyond primitive violence." The Altarian commander reached the climax of his opening form. All four weapons moved in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm any possible defense. According to traditional teaching, no opponent could counter the Four Gates of Judgment when performed at master level. Veltar's primary blade thrust toward Taeho's center mass. Secondary weapons swept in from both sides. The fourth arm prepared a finishing strike to follow up on whatever opening the initial attacks created. It was textbook perfect, a demonstration of why Altarian martial arts were considered the pinnacle of combat development. The crowd began to cheer, anticipating the quick conclusion they had predicted. Then Taeho moved. What happened next occurred faster than most nervous systems in the arena could process. The human exploded from stillness into motion with a speed that seemed to violate physics. There was no warning, no wind-up, no preparatory movement. One instant, he was standing still. The next instant, he was inside Veltar's reach. The watching aliens saw a blur of movement followed by perfect stillness. When their eyes could focus again, the duel was over. Taeho stood with his crystal blade pressed against Veltar's throat, just below the natural armor plating. The Altarians' four weapons hung uselessly in the air, their perfect technique incomplete. Veltar's eyes showed shock and confusion. He had not even finished his opening sequence. The arena fell into absolute silence. The only sound was the harmonic humming of crystal blades that were no longer moving through the air. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. The silence stretched as thousands of alien minds struggled to process what they had witnessed. "Did anyone see what happened?" whispered a Centaurian delegate. "The human was there, then he was there," replied his companion, pointing at different positions. Security Chief Knox Allen immediately activated the arena's recording systems, rewinding to analyze the moment of movement. Even with the station's high-speed cameras, the human's attack appeared as a brief acceleration followed by perfect positioning. The technical systems had barely captured the motion. Commentator Zilfon found his voice first, though it carried uncertainty. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, it appears the human has achieved victory. I confess I am not certain how this occurred." Veltar stared down at the human who had appeared inside his guard as if by teleportation. The crystal blade at his throat was steady as a mountain. The human's dark eyes showed no emotion, no triumph, no anger, just professional competence. "Surrender," Tejo said quietly. "You are defeated." "How?" Veltar gasped. "My technique was perfect. I followed every classical form precisely." "You followed forms designed for practice, not killing," Tejo replied. "I followed instincts designed for survival." Arbitrator Nalseth recovered from his shock first. His ancient voice carried clearly, "First blood is drawn. The human is victorious." The crowd erupted into chaos. Beings who had never seen real combat tried to understand what had happened. Voices rose in dozens of languages, all expressing the same confusion and disbelief. In the betting sections, panic began to set in as the impossible outcome became reality. Species that had wagered entire trade agreements on Altarian victory faced financial catastrophe. Others who had placed sympathy, bets on the human suddenly found themselves wealthy beyond imagination. Park So-min stared at the arena with her mouth open. She had known Tejo was skilled, but this was beyond anything she had expected. "How did he move so fast?" she whispered to Dr. Choi. The xenobiologist was studying her scanner readings with fascination. His muscle fiber activation reached levels I have never recorded. For approximately 1.3 seconds, his body performed at theoretical maximum efficiency. She looked up with wonder. This is what happens when evolution designs a perfect predator. Jinwoo smiled for the first time in days. He had seen Tejo move like this before, in situations where human soldiers had to overcome impossible odds to survive. The galaxy was getting its first lesson in why Earth's children were so hard to kill. Captain Ryu activated his communication, linked to the human diplomatic team. "All stations, this is command. Our negotiating position just improved dramatically. The arena's instant replay systems finally managed to slow down the crucial moment enough for alien eyes to follow. The images showed Tejo exploding from his guard position, not with wild aggression but with perfect tactical precision. He had sidestepped Veltar's primary thrust while simultaneously moving inside the reach of the secondary attacks. His counterstrike had been delivered while the Altarian was still executing his opening combination. "Impossible," breathed Keith Iron, the ancient weapons master who had trained Veltar. "No being can move with such speed and precision." But the recordings did not lie. Frame by frame, they showed a masterclass in combat efficiency. Where Veltar's movements had been beautiful and complex, Tejo's attack was simple and direct. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, just the minimum force required to achieve maximum effect. Elder Morthak, one of the few beings in the arena old enough to remember real warfare, slowly stood in his observation box. His ancient voice carried clearly through the chaos. "Younglings," he called out, and the crowd gradually quieted to hear him speak. "You have just witnessed something your comfortable civilizations had forgotten. You have seen what a real warrior looks like." He gestured toward Tejo, who still held his position with professional calm. "That is not primitive aggression. That is evolution's answer to a world where the weak do not survive to reproduce. Earth created the perfect predator, and you mistook it for a simple beast." The old warrior's words sent chills through the watching crowd. For the first time, many began to understand that they had badly misjudged not just this human, but his entire species. In the combat circle, Teho slowly lowered his blade and stepped back from Veltar. The duel was over. The galaxy had learned something new about Deathworlders, and the lesson would not be forgotten. The silence in the arena stretched like a held breath. Thousands of beings sat frozen in their seats, minds struggling to process what their eyes had recorded, but their understanding rejected. The impossible had become reality. The primitive Deathworlder had defeated the master of classical combat in less time than it took most species to form a coherent thought. Veltar slowly raised his four hands in the traditional gesture of surrender. His crystal plates had shifted to a pale, defeated color. The weapon master who had seemed invincible moments before now looked like what he truly was. A being who had studied combat as an art form, but never faced death as a reality. "I yield," Veltar said, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's perfect acoustics. "I acknowledge defeat." Teho stepped back and lowered his crystal blade. His breathing had not even increased. His stance remained balanced and ready, a predator that had successfully defended its territory but remained alert for other threats. To the watching aliens, his calm competence was perhaps more frightening than his speed had been. Arbitrator Nalseth recovered his composure first. The ancient Centaurian had presided over countless formal combats in his long career, but nothing had prepared him for this. By the laws of honorable challenge, Teho of Earth is declared victorious. Let the record show that first blood was drawn fairly and according to tradition. The crowd began to stir as the official declaration broke through their shock. Voices rose in a dozen different languages, all trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. How is this possible? Did you see him move? The recordings must be wrong. No being moves that fast. In the broadcast booths, commentators scrambled to provide analysis for their confused audiences across the galaxy. Commentator Zilfon consulted with technical experts while trying to maintain professional composure. "Friends and beings," he announced, "we are reviewing the arena's sensor data to understand the sequence of events. What appeared to be instantaneous movement actually occurred over 1.3 seconds, though at speeds that exceed normal perception thresholds for most species." Fluxara added with obvious bewilderment, "Our combat analysts are studying the recordings. The human's technique appears to prioritize efficiency over artistic form. While aesthetically primitive, it achieved tactical superiority through unusual methods." Security Chief Knox Allen had already downloaded the complete sensor logs to his private systems. His species had been warriors once. Before joining galactic civilization had made them soft. The recordings showed him something that made his old soldier's instincts come alive with recognition and dread. "Pull up the human's biographical data," he ordered his aide. "I want to know what kind of world produces beings like this." The files made for sobering reading. Earth's history was a catalog of violence that would have destroyed most civilized species. Natural disasters that killed millions, wars that lasted decades, predators that had shaped human evolution through constant selection pressure. Disease, famine, climate change, asteroid impacts. Earth had thrown every possible catastrophe at its children, and they had not just survived, but thrived. "Their entire evolutionary history is combat training," Knox Allen muttered. "No wonder they move like living weapons." In the human observation section, Park So-min was receiving urgent communications from diplomats across the station. Species that had dismissed Earth's trade proposals were now requesting immediate meetings. The odds in their negotiations had shifted dramatically. "Ambassador Yang wants to see you as soon as possible," she told Tai-Ho through their communication link. "Half the galaxy is trying to schedule meetings with our delegation." Dr. Choi was still studying her scanner data with fascination. "Your muscle fiber recruitment reached theoretical maximum. Your nervous system response time approached the physical limits of biological tissue. For those few seconds, you functioned at absolute peak human capability." "That is what happens when the alternative is death," Teho replied simply. Elder Morthak made his way slowly down to the arena floor. The ancient warrior's steps carried the weight of centuries, but his eyes were bright with recognition. He approached Teho with the respect due from one soldier to another. "Young warrior," Morthak said, using the old forms of address that had been forgotten by most modern species. You have reminded us of truths we chose to forget. In our comfort, we became weak. In our civilization, we lost the knowledge of what strength really means. Other beings began to gather around the arena floor, their curiosity overcoming their shock. They stared at Tae-ho as if seeing a human for the first time, which in many ways they were. The diplomatic representative they had dismissed as primitive now stood revealed as something far more dangerous and valuable. Veltar approached slowly, his pride clearly wounded, but his honesty intact. "Human Tai-ho," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I spoke of things I did not understand and insulted the memory of those who deserved honor." Tae-ho studied the Altarian's face, reading the sincerity there. "Apology accepted, Commander. Your technique was beautiful to watch, but beauty and effectiveness are not always the same thing." "How did you learn to fight like that?" Veltar asked. "What training produces such ability?" "Earth taught me," Tae-ho replied. "Every day of my childhood, every challenge I faced, every friend I watched die, all of it was training. My world does not allow the weak to survive long enough to have children." The implications sent ripples through the gathering crowd. This was not just one unusually skilled human. This was what Earth produced as a standard model. The galaxy had been negotiating with a species of natural-born warriors without realizing it. Counselor Park Ji-hoon, Earth's senior political representative, arrived with a full diplomatic escort. His face showed satisfaction mixed with concern. The demonstration had achieved its purpose, but it might have achieved too much. "The President sends his congratulations," Counselor Park told Tae-ho quietly, though she is somewhat concerned about the broader implications of your performance. Captain Ryu monitored station security frequencies with growing interest. Every intelligence service in the galaxy is now requesting detailed information about human military capabilities. Our diplomatic status just changed from minor curiosity to significant concern. The betting halls were in chaos as the impossible results became final. Species that had wagered against human victory faced massive losses. More importantly, the economic calculations that governed galactic trade were being rapidly revised. Beings who could move like Tai-ho represented opportunities and threats that had not been previously considered. In the medical section, Veltar submitted to examination with subdued dignity. The Altarian's injuries were minor, a small cut on his throat where Tae-ho's blade had touched crystal armor. But his psychological wounds would take longer to heal. Everything he had believed about combat superiority had been shattered in 1.3 seconds. "The human could have killed me," Veltar admitted to the medical technician. "He chose not to. That was mercy, not inability." Word of the duel results was already spreading through subspace communication networks. On Earth, the news was received with quiet satisfaction. Humanity had always known they were different from the galaxy's civilized species. Now the galaxy knew it too. On Altair Prime, the Peacekeeping Command reviewed the combat recordings with growing unease. If one human diplomat could defeat their finest warrior so easily, what did that say about their assumptions regarding Earth's military capabilities? On a dozen different worlds, intelligence analysts began urgent reviews of everything they thought they knew about the third planet from Sol. The Deathworlders were clearly not what they had appeared to be. As the amphitheater slowly emptied, beings departed with their worldviews fundamentally altered. The small, quiet human who had stood calmly while being mocked had revealed himself as something unprecedented in their experience. A perfect fusion of intelligence and lethality. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would reshape diplomatic relations for generations. Earth's children were not primitive savages stumbling toward civilization. They were apex predators who had achieved sentience without losing their killing instincts. The Deathworlders had announced their arrival in galactic society, and the announcement had been written in crystal and blood on the floor of Harmony's Edge Station. The universe would never quite look at humans the same way again. In his quarters, Tae-ho sat quietly with his friends and colleagues, sharing a simple meal. The galaxy might be re-evaluating humanity, but for him, the important work was done. The memory of fallen comrades had been honored. The insult had been answered. Everything else was just politics.